The year was 2004, and my career in healthcare almost came to a screeching halt before it started. It was the fall of that year, and it went something like this. Joe, what is this? And why am I looking at this 45 minutes late? You know that you put the entire clinic behind schedule, and this is unacceptable. And true, I did know it was unacceptable. This doctor had a notorious reputation for efficiency, and I was clearly behind schedule. And that was seen as a completely non-team move. And so he was pretty miffed about this, understandably. I said, oh, yeah, the peripheral neuropathy case. Well, see, the thing is, and he just kind of shook his head and stopped looking at me at this point. And I said, the thing is, as I started talking to him, it sounded a little bit less like a chiropractic case and more like not a chiropractic case. Joe, history and exam are bogus. And the only reason we even do them is to get them into the full spine x-ray so that we can take the x-rays, charge them for films, and diagnose the cause of their problem based on the films. The rest of it is useless. It's something we have to do. And it was kind of like one of those moments where in cinema, where everything just kind of swirls around you and comes to a complete stop, like time slows down. And I'm like, what did I even do to get here? And I can tell you, I didn't have like one of those chiropractic miracle stories as a child or in high school where I'm like, wow, I feel this is what I want to do for a living. You know what I mean? Like, I don't really even know how I got there to some extent. I grew up in Jamestown, North Dakota, proud of the prairie. In fact, if you look at the marketing for the city, Jamestown has everything you want. It's the Buffalo City. It has it all. And has the world's largest buffalo, well known for that. But in North Dakota, back when I was living there, at least, people only went to the doctor if they were sick, and they went to the chiropractor if they had an injury. Other than that, you kind of stay away from the doctor. So I didn't really have this like huge aha moment where I wanted to do that. In fact, about my senior year, I finally determined what I thought I might want to do. I had a psychology class, and the teacher of that psychology class became a good friend and a mentor of mine. And although I didn't have abuse in my childhood, I definitely had, some challenges. I lived in 7 different households by the time I was 11 through different types of divorce and living situations, that kind of thing. And was always pretty introspective and interested in feeling better. And so I decided that year, my senior year, to get into psychology, see if I could understand more about feeling good from a mental perspective and help kids that might have also been struggling at different stages of their life due to similar circumstances, kind of help them navigate that and get there to a better place. That's what I wanted to do. That's kind of what I thought I might do. But let's be serious. Like I loved running, you know what I mean? I wanted to run. So like college was another way for me to run and compete. I love competing. I love victory. I got a scholarship to run at Morehead State University and spent my freshman year there. It was a great time. The coaches were really good. In retrospect, I probably didn't appreciate what that coach had offered me. His approach, and his wife was the co-coach, their approach is more kind of like forcing your best out of you, if there's such a thing. And I kind of decided, I heard about this coach across the river in Fargo that was more like the runner whisperer, if there's such a thing, and he kind of coaxed it out of you. And I felt like there was an opportunity to switch teams and maybe I could compete at a higher level. And I had an aspiration at this point where maybe I could make a living as a professional runner. the Olympic trials were something I had on my dream board if there was such a thing. And although I did compete at a high level and I did have the opportunity to go to nationals, my dreams were really never realized. And there's various reasons for that. One of them is I had this autoimmune condition and that I was unaware of. And so imagine being able to run almost a 4 flat mile, but being diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. So I would race, and then after the race, my brain would like boil inside my head, and my body would just, instead of recovering, it would try to eat itself. And my roommates at the time can attest to you, something wasn't right. I would wake up in the middle of the night with night terrors and screaming bloody murder and freaking everybody out. And so my career as a runner became less and less prevalent. And especially, it became evident at like the national level, because in prelims and finals, I struggled to recover in finals because I had this autoimmune thing that was triggered during the prelim. Anyway, my mentor committed suicide, good friend of mine. And so suddenly I wasn't going to be a school psychologist anymore. Suddenly I wasn't going to be a professional runner anymore. My roommate at the time, his dad was a chiropractor. And so I just started talking about chiropractic and decided I wanted to help people, athletes mainly, get back on the field and, help people get out of pain. So in like kind of a non-drug way. Always been kind of against drugs as a primary tool without investigation. I've always been kind of curious as to why things are the way they are. So basically, I found myself 6 figures in debt, not wanting to be a chiropractor anymore, because I felt like this particular office was practicing the gold standard of what chiropractic was at the time. It was my belief anyway. And so I was just like, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do. I might maybe paint houses in the summer, go back to North Dakota. I wasn't really sure. And so a colleague of mine, her name is Dr. Sarah Calamaros. Actually, she practices in Coeur d'Alene. She's an amazing doctor. If you happen to be looking for one, especially if you're in that area, she's amazing. She had moved out to the Bay Area slightly before me and was like, hey, come to this seminar with me. And I'm like, I don't know, Sarah, I don't know that I want to be a chiropractor anymore. I don't know I want to be a doctor anymore. And here's part of the reason why. It wasn't just that conversation. It was, I had seen a lot of cool things in chiropractic school. I really loved the vitalistic philosophy of chiropractic, that the body knew how to heal itself. I loved the idea of nutrition and healthy lifestyle, which seemed to be espoused in some parts of chiropractic. Really like those things. I noticed a little bit of a drink the Kool-Aid kind of thing, and there was a little bit of a dogma associated with it, that I've never really been a huge fan of dogma or rigid approaches to things. But, being the curious student I was, I asked a lot of questions, and of course I would get some answers, but really a lot of time the answer was, especially if I was challenging the status quo, it was like, hey, kid, pay your dues. You don't really have a right to be asking these questions right now. Just keep your head down and work. I'm like, okay. So it's been 20 years in practice now. I have some ideas I'd like to share with you today with that in mind. So I go to the seminar, and turns out it was this thing called AK, applied kinesiology, which is a way to use muscle testing to evaluate a person. And I'd heard about AK. AK was a type of chiropractic or diagnostic value system. This chiropractor in South Dakota, where my grandfather lived, he went to an AK doctor, and the doctor's like, hey, I think you have a serious heart problem and you should go see a medical doctor. And he went to the medical doctor, and the medical doctor actually put him on some emergency medicine, and there was a procedure done and saved his life. And it was amazing. So we had probably another 20, 30 years with my grandfather as a result of that. Maybe he would end up in the ER and another way. But living on a farm in rural South Dakota, that was his experience. And so like I'd heard about AK. There was a couple of people that were doing AK at my chiropractic college when I was there. I was more competitive in chiropractic school in terms of like I got good grades, but because I was competitive, I really wasn't like a dedicated learner, so to speak. I just really didn't like getting bad grades. So I got good grades and do well on boards. But there were people that were doing this AK thing that were students that were like totally crushing it in terms of getting outcomes with their patients as they were interns compared to some of the other practitioners. And I thought that was noteworthy, but I really found it mysterious. I really wasn't that into it. So I went to this seminar, not really sure I wanted to be a doctor anymore. And so the guy that was teaching the seminar, I think was ahead of his time. And what I was expecting was a technique seminar, and there was definitely technique, but AK was started by this guy named George Goodhart, which is kind of ironic considering my grandfather had a heart problem that was diagnosed with AK and ended up, prolonging his life. And so I got in there and he was talking about the Optimum Criterion of healthcare, which is what I want to share with you today. And it talked about the Optimum Criterion, which is basically find the basic cause of what's happening. Number 2, develop faith, confidence, and belief in your patient. And then number 3, develop a remedy that is efficient, that is economical, and that is lasting. I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. And then he did this demonstration where he took somebody up in the front of the room that had this chronic issue, like, 15 years or so. And he like muscle tested this person and then did this procedure where like the person was like wiggling on the table because it really was painful at the time of the procedure. And the person basically got up and didn't have pain for the first time in 15, 20 years. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. And then the question he asked everybody in the group was, how long does that last? How long does that last, doc? And so now here was a guy that actually was asking questions and was actually challenging what he just did, which was actually pretty impressive, to help somebody like that. So I thought that was super cool. And here he was asking questions and he was talking about the optimum criteria of health. And he started talking about something called the triad of health, which was instead of looking at things, mostly chiropractors in the room, chiropractic students, was instead of looking at things as like a structural issue only, we started talking about an equilateral triangle that represented the triad of health, which was structural, chemical, and emotional factors that affected health and vitality. So that was kind of cool. We were kind of moving out of this dogmatic idea. And then what followed was that was a 100-hour course of like different types of techniques and how to become good at muscle testing. And by the time lunch came around, not only did I still want to stay in healthcare, but I wanted to be an AK doctor. And I also wanted to teach AK to other doctors because I felt like it was a cool way to create a more lasting change with people. And I really liked the philosophy. What was interesting about that time too was I pivoted from a person who also happened to be in medicine to help people to becoming like finding my true purpose, which is to really dedicate my life to learning more so that I could do better. And so just with that in mind, what I'm about to say, if you're a clinician or some of what I say today might sound kind of harsh. And I'm just really a curious guy. So like I take the same approach to my own practice and my own approach with patients. And the deal is like, what else? What else can we do? What more can we do? How can we make it more efficient? How can we make it more economical? How can we make it last longer? So the idea isn't to be critical of those of you who are dedicated and have learned how to help people, but to say, look, when I was in this chiropractic office seeing 130 people a day, there were people that were absolutely getting better with this model, 100%. And I saw like legitimate, what looked like chiropractic miracles where people would come in, they would get an adjustment and their whole life would change right in front of our eyes. And it was amazing. And then I saw people that would get adjusted and they would feel a little bit better. It seemed like it would come back relatively quickly. Sometimes not until the next visit or just before, but sometimes by the time they got to their car, Sometimes it didn't help at all. Sometimes people got worse during the adjustment. And the conversation was kind of like, well, just let's keep going. And also medical doctors are bad in this particular clinic. It was that conversation is very competitive, which kind of makes sense. I mean, medical doctors did try to, there's this trial called the Wilk trial where they tried to make chiropractic not a thing, so chiropractor's a little touchy about that, right? And but that was part of like the education that I never really subscribed to. I just feel like maybe we should be more collaborative as clinicians. I saw these amazing things, but then I saw people that they just weren't responding. So like they were kind of slipping through the cracks. They had seen medical doctors, they'd seen PTs, they'd seen occupational therapists, they've had x-rays, they've had MRIs, they've seen massage therapists, several massage therapists. They'd seen, they'd gone the alternative medicine route. They'd seen different chiropractors that did different techniques. They'd seen acupuncturists, and they'd seen naturopaths and craniosacral doctors. They'd seen shamans. They'd tried prayer, and they were still looking for answers. And I was kind of like a little disillusioned seeing that there was a lot of people actually that were still looking for answers. And it didn't seem like there was a great answer for them out there. It seemed like there were people that were doing great work and they were helping people in the moment possibly, or maybe not, and they just didn't know where to turn. So I didn't know where to turn either. And I kind of decided that maybe I didn't want to be in medicine. But then I went to the seminar and I kind of learned that I could be a learner and I could be a chiropractor second and be a doctor first. Now, some of the cool things about this was that in the morning of that first seminar, which is like a revelation for me, and believe me, I'm going to get to some other things later, but I just want to tell you how I got to this point. I want to share this with you. It's super important because that morning, and this is what I mean by ahead of his time, he could have got into the muscle testing technique and how to correct muscle imbalances. But he didn't do that. He got into philosophy, and he was talking about what a doctor means. And doctor is Latin from docere, and forgive me for my accent, but docere or docere, which means teacher, which is pretty cool. Not treater. Now, this is taking liberty with Latin. Technically, treater is means like curata, to cure. But another way to look at treating somebody would be to kind of deal with them or tell them or drag them here, go there, do this because I told you. And that's more like from tractare or trahere, which is to drag around or deal with. So if you're not teaching your patients, you're treating them, and then you're just kind of dragging them around. Patient is Latin from pator, which means to suffer. Isn't that wild? So like basically, if you're a doctor, our job is actually more to teach them than to treat them. And if you notice about me, like I'm super into education and I take a lot of time talking to you about what's going on. And it's because it's my primary role is to collaborate with you. And you can't really collaborate with your doctor unless you have informed consent and some sort of basis for what the basic cause, right? Everything's going to come back in this prolonged discussion we're going to have over the next year or so. The next hour and a half in this module about the Optimum criteria. So let's find that basic cause. Well, instead of being a patient, if you pivot to becoming student, studere is Latin, meaning to persevere, to overcome. So instead of treating you, the goal would be to teach you, to collaborate with you, to inspire you, to inform you, to help you with autonomy so that you can overcome whatever you're dealing with. And that's beautiful. That's awesome. And I'm into that. I'm all in. And I became all in that moment. And so I got certified in that AK thing. The cool thing about AK, just a quick aside, is George Goodhart was such a good-hearted guy that he didn't patent or trademark AK. And so now you have like literally 60 different or more techniques out there that use muscle testing that can say they're doing applied kinesiology because it was never trademarked or patented. So it kind of confuses patients when they hear that. And a lot of people are turned off by the muscle testing thing because they've had some weird experiences with it. But like all things in medicine and in life, all things aren't created equal. And so if you're looking for somebody that does muscle testing, you'd want to find somebody that does professional applied kinesiology, and they are listed on the ICAK USA website. So that's an aside. If you want the link, I can attach that later to the to the post video with all the edits. Moving forward, after AK, I got into this thing called functional endocrinology. There's this guy named Tatis Karazian who's teaching this class in Minneapolis, and it was about hormones. And I kind of run into a wall in patients that had hormones, and I'm like, I'm going to go take this class. He also happened to be a diplomate in applied kinesiology, which is the ultimate standing in that particular field and that organization. And so I went to the seminar, and the first thing he did was he kind of like poo-pooed muscle testing for hormones. And it's like he killed the sacred cow that I had just built up in my mind. And it's kind of like, that's the thing. As a clinician, you can get really confident really quickly, but then also like it can be very humbling very quickly. And our goal, if we're going to be teaching, I believe, is to learn as much as we possibly can. And so I get kind of freaked out when I see things that people are so sure, because as a clinician, I have a hard time being really sure all the time because it's like I'm going to learn something tomorrow. So I like to think of everything as kind of an open mind and an open exploration into territory. Anyway, that's a quick aside. So I went to the seminar and I learned how to start doing lab testing. And again, this was like 2006 or so. And I just fell in love with lab testing because it got us information that you couldn't get from a muscle test. And that was super cool. So I got into that. And that was like before this functional medicine thing started, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. And I'm going to spend a whole module talking about functional medicine. Today is going to be an introduction to a much longer story with hopefully some information that you find useful. And so basically, I started doing lab testing with people, and that was really cool. So I was doing nutrition already with muscle testing, but then I added lab testing to the roster. And from there, I got into a little bit of like this functional medicine thing, and I was getting these awesome results in functional medicine. And then I hit a wall with people. And the wall that I hit was with children on the spectrum, where I was doing gluten-free with them and doing cool stuff. And I thought, what else? What else can I do? And what's funny about this story is that I went to a seminar in LA. It was an AK seminar. It was like the annual meeting for all the AK doctors. And there was a guy that they invited in to speak. And this guy, his name was Robert Malello, if you've ever heard of him. And he was up there. He's kind of got this New York accent, kind of sounded like John Travolta and Staying Alive, kind of that kind of thing. And I'm like, who's this guy? And I was in the back of the room with my arms crossed. I had just gotten the diplomate in AK, which is this high standard. And so I was feeling like kind of like a prince in this room, you know what I mean? Had just been endowed with this. And I was very excited and, of course, very confident in my abilities and maybe a little closed-minded at times, like thinking AK was the new thing. And so he went up there and he was talking about children on the spectrum. And he's like, well, what's happening in the brain of a child with ADHD or autism? And then I'm like, gluten-free, and he goes, okay, gluten-free. I hear that. So you're prescribing a gluten-free diet to children and some of these children are getting better. How did gluten-free help them? How did gluten-free help that person? And I was like, it just, I helped them, their brain worked better. He's like, oh, okay. How did that help their brain work better? And it got quiet. And then he goes, well, what's happening in the brain of a child with ADHD? And if you ever watched him, this is a very common thing he goes through with folks. And somebody goes, cranial sacral. And he goes, which is one of the things that you learn in applied kinesiology is how to do cranial sacral, how to the basics of Chinese medicine and a lot of nutrition. And so like, he's like cranial sacral. Okay. So some of you have helped, it sounds like people with ADHD or autism improve their symptoms by doing cranial sacral. How did that help that person? Like what's going on in the brain of a child with ADHD or autism? And like nobody can answer. So here I was, all like excited, and I realized that I've been treating people. I was dragging them around. I'm like, here, do gluten-free. I've been treating people with ADHD. Technically, I can't say I was treating them. I was supporting them by helping them identify a diet that could work, right? And they were getting better, but some people weren't. And the reason I didn't know what to do next is because I had no idea what was going on in the brain of a child with ADHD or autism. And as it turns out, like what I'd become was that I become kind of a fix-it guy where I could find something and then I could fix that thing on that person by doing a technique and they would do better. But what I was missing was like an understanding of the hierarchy of systems and how these things actually went wrong in the first place. So I was like, even though I thought I was being an educator, and to some extent I was, the next level for me was like understanding where I wasn't being an educator, where I was being a treater instead, basically perpetuating the suffering because instead of teaching them, I was treating them. And so I had repeat business because they would come back, but I wasn't helping them with that transformative experience. Bad deal. It was like a revelation for me again. And so I'm like, okay. So I ended up taking Dr. Malalo's course. Luckily for me, he was teaching in the Bay Area. And so it was, how many hours is that course? I mean, it was 150 hours. I think it was 8 weekends, 8 3-day weekends, something like that. Whatever the math is on that, sorry. But roughly, no, it was 13 modules, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so basically, here's how module one went. I was like, okay, he's going to teach me how to fix kids that have ADHD. I was so excited. But the first morning he was talking about the development of the human nervous system and how like the nervous system evolved from a sea squirt and this little organism that could swim only in the larva phase. So it like embeds in the bottom of the ocean. And then when sea squirts procreate, they create a little baby and that baby can swim. It has to decide, do I want to stay next to my parents or do I want to look for something else? And so once that was the first organism that could move that way. And so in order to move, the brain needed to decide do I want to go here or do I want to go here? And so the entire foundation of the brain, our entire brain evolved from a decision, approach or avoid. And our entire nervous system, our emotional regulation, our cognitive function, our immune function is built on our motor system, which is pretty crazy when you think about how important gait is at this point. And so through that course, I started to understand the development of the nervous system from a single-celled organism all the way to where it is today, through like the missing link, through the period of evolution. He wrote this amazing book, Human Evolution and Child Developmental Disorders. It was really, really, really interesting book. And basically, what I learned in that course was where every freaking technique that I'd learned in AK, I'm like, this is where that fits. Okay, so now I started looking at everybody that is a practitioner as particularly good at a few things, and those few things are a particular modality that might work for a patient at a particular time in the grand scheme of a comprehensive care plan that's going to get them this transformative experience. Does that make sense? So like chiropractic, for example, if you adjust the spine, your fast stretching muscles that attach to the spine, that fast stretch of the muscle goes up through the spinal cord into an area of the brain called the cerebellum. It affects the cerebellum at this area called the vermis, which projects to the limbic area of the frontal lobe and the immune system modulating parts. And so like, yes, chiropractic is an amazing modality if they happen to need therapy in that area of their hierarchy of needs. Well, gosh, how do you determine where the therapy is necessary? Well, if you understand the basic cause, basically you're doing a deep history and you're using forms to get you there. And then you're using diagnostics. I'm going to do a whole module on history and cases. And then I'm going to do a whole module on diagnostics, different diagnostics that are available to us and cases. And then I'm going to do a whole module on post-care, which are things like supplements. That'll be a whole module on exercise. That'll be a whole module. I'm going to do a whole module on different diets. I might do one module on each diet that I recommend. So the idea is to get that conversation going now, but all of a sudden I had to be good at all of those things to get a comprehensive care plan going. So it's like, you got to just keep learning. It's endless. It's endless. And it's exciting. There's never been a better time to be a clinician because there's never been more information available to us. It just can be daunting to funnel all that information down to the specific moment for each of you. And those of you who stuck with me, it's really helped me become a better doctor. So thank you. So after the Malalo course, I started really understanding that instead of being a clinician that was educating clients on maybe the mechanisms that were driving their injury. I was now educating them on the different systems that were gone awry that was causing their injury. And then it became a lot of like lifestyle education. So diet really started to matter a ton. Supplements had already mattered a little bit, but now they had a new meaning. Um, Things like sleep mattered a lot. Things like exercise mattered a lot. Things like work stress and relationship stress mattered a lot. And so if we wanted to facilitate that lasting change, that conversation needed to be part of the equation. So that was like the next step. And I ended up getting the highest credential in that field, which is called a diplomate in chiropractic neurology. And that was a very nice moment. And I was feeling pretty good about my practice at that point and how I was doing things. And the cool thing about being a chiropractic neurologist, it allowed me to say things. I actually treat concussions and I can actually treat different things that I couldn't when I was just a chiropractor, which only allowed me to specifically treat low back and neck pain. Now, we're going to get into treating a little bit more and these different standards of care because in the optimum criteria of healthcare, we want to become a teacher, which I get that, but you still have to be able to do some things to help people. And that's all good. But there's this other idea, which is what's the best thing we can do at this moment to get the greatest change and becoming really efficient. So the optimum criteria is about efficiency. And so being able to do an exam and line up a care plan after a history is really the next part of that. So we're going to spend a lot of time later on talking about my exam and how I got to my exam, where it is, and like how that really benefits you. And so I'm excited for that. That's probably going to be sometime this summer. I'll be getting into that one. And so basically now where we're at is neurology plus nutrition and kinesiology, still alternative medicine, but more understanding hierarchy of systems. So the question is really always been now, like, why is that? Why do people have what they have? What's going on? And so for a transformative process, we really need to get to that point where we understand what that is. And one of the realities of that is that everybody has different capacities. Okay, so in this hierarchy of systems, we need to understand a little bit about the brain, right? Now, did you know that the brain has this area called the prefrontal area that it engages in something called allostasis, which is return to homeostasis. So basically, if your frontal lobes aren't working, your body doesn't really have the capacity to come back to baseline or a healthy presentation. I mean, think about that for a second. If the brain isn't doing its job, the probability that you can come back to homeostasis, which is a balanced physiological function, is almost, I mean, it's improbable at best. It could randomly happen, but it's unlikely to stay there. So things like loss of sense of smell, things like memory issues, attentional issues, sleep disturbances, numbness and tingling, balance issues. And all of a sudden, we understand that maybe the brain isn't working particularly well, and maybe that's why a person's having such a hard time. But the nervous system is just one system. We also have to know a little bit about hormones, right? We need to know more than just about sex hormones. We need to know about thyroid hormone and cortisol and insulin and melatonin, right? We need to know about that interplay. We need to know a ton about the immune system. And what's interesting about the brain is 90% of the brain are immune cells. So like 10% of the brain helps us with pathways with things like memory and like executive function planning, balance, our senses, right? Social engagements, another cognitive domain. But that's only 10% of the brain. The other 90% are immune cells. In fact, that's what Einstein had more of than anybody, which are these immune cells. And so when I got into chiropractic neurology, I started really getting into rehab. But then I was kind of missing the boat on like the immune system because so much of the brain are immune cells. So I got into this program with this guy named Dr. Sam Yannick. He's an amazing clinician. He practices on the East Coast. He's got this program called Cogence Immunology. And I started learning a ton from him about functional neurology, or excuse me, functional immunology, which is how to look at white blood cells and how to help people with things more like autoimmunity,
with infectious disease, and people that have had concussions, maybe why they're not recovering because of the immune aspect of that. And so that was like another huge level of my practice. And so that was all super cool. And we start to understand that people not only need capacities for hormones and their brain, but what's the capacity of their ability to fight infection? What's their capacity to regulate their immune system against autoimmunity? What's their metabolic capacity? Like, can they stabilize their blood sugar? Can they actually have healthy kidney function and healthy liver function? What's their psychological capacity to endure stress? What's their physical capacity to endure exercise? Things like that. And so not everybody has the same capacity. So 10 people walk in here with digestive disturbance. What are we going to do? Okay. I got to tell you, my bias is that I really find protocols to be, they just give me the ick. Ah, they just give me the ick. And I think everybody's wanting a protocol. Not everybody, a lot of people are, but a lot of people are actually terrified of protocols because they've gone to a hotshot who was the expert in a particular field, who's doing a protocol with everybody, and they've been completely burned by that person. So they don't like protocols either. But protocols do work for non-complex issues. So this is inherently one of the issues that we run into in the medical field, is that I think the existing models struggle with complexity. They struggle with complexity. So if we were to talk just a little bit about the existing models, it's kind of cool. I use ChatGPT to help me summarize this a little bit. And by the way, ChatGPT, and there's another website called Site that is now connected me to information and research. And I feel like I'm gobbling up information faster than any other time that I have. And it's really helping me become a better doctor for you. But basically, let's say a person walks into a situation where now they have like, let's say acid reflux. They have acid reflux. So what's available to them are different models. One model that's available to them is the standard model. Another model that's available to them is the alternative model. And then another model that's available to them is the biohacking model or self-care model. And so what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about each one of these models. Okay, so the standard medical model, the strengths are evidence-based. Okay, so it relies on research, clinical trials, and then peer-reviewed trials. A lot of these, especially drug trials, are done on humans, right? So you know that it's not just a rat study. It's regulated. Okay, so there's strict regulations and oversight. It ensures quality control and patient safety. So the Hippocratic Oath is first do no harm, right? It offers comprehensive care. So the thing about it is like you can go in there and you can go in there with acid reflux, and there's a bevy of doctors that are available. There's gastroenterologists. There's people that focus on the digestive system. There are endocrinologists. There are neurologists. So like based on your intake, there might be some evidence that you have a different issue driving the digestive issue. So you can go see that specialist. And that's another awesome thing about the medical model is there's all these specialties, but like its greatest strength is its greatest weakness. If you're only going based upon what the research says, there's things that haven't been discovered yet that could be useful. If you're really only going from specialist to specialist, they become a little bit loculated in their own wings of the hospital, their own rooms, and they're not really integrating particularly well. There's this idea of a holistic model that's kind of escaping them. It's very reductionistic, and it's also very dogmatic. They do talk about the idea of prevention, but the idea of prevention in the medical model, I think, is subject to discussion, right? Yes, there's like no smoking programs, which are great. They do talk about like losing weight as a way of preventing cardiovascular disease, but they'll just tell people to lose weight. Diet, go do a diet and maybe you'll lose weight. And now they're using Ozempic to help people lose weight, right? But it's like, well, what if that diet didn't work? Or what if they're already dieting? Then what? And they're like, well, maybe you're just depressed. A lot of people end up in psychiatry in that model. And so you start to go, well, okay, what about like cancer prevention? And you can go get a colonoscopy. And if you go to the colonoscopy and they say, yes, you had polyps and remove them, and some of them were cancerous, That's not prevention. That's early detection. Okay, you can get a mammogram and they may find something weird, and then they biopsy it, and oh, it's cancer. That's not prevention. That's early detection. And look, that's important, but it's not the same thing. All right. And in the medical model, this is by confirmation bias. I see a lot of people that unfortunately weren't responding to that, and they'll go to the medical model, they'll have a complaint, and they'll run labs, and the labs are normal, supposedly normal, or they look normal, and the diagnostics come back normal. So in this case of acid reflux, maybe their stomach looks normal on like a endoscopy or a biopsy, like everything's normal. And you're like, yeah, but I have acid reflux. They're like, well, here, I'll give you something to control the acid reflux, which is serving that person. Okay. The next level will be to understand, well, why is the stomach not working? Okay. Why is it not working? Not just what's happening, but why? It doesn't meet the diagnostic criteria for disease process. So that's where the medical model starts to like run out of steam, is that a lot of things that are not going well are basically told they're normal, i.e., they don't meet the criteria of a disease process, so it can't be treated. You can't treat what isn't there. And so I think this is the part where we have to give medical doctors a bit of a break and understand that their model is designed to diagnose and treat disease. Okay. So if you go in there and you don't have a disease, you're just depressed, but it doesn't meet the criteria of clinical depression, or you just have acid reflux, but it doesn't meet the criteria of like ulcers, okay? Or you have joint pain, but it doesn't meet the criteria of rheumatoid arthritis, or you have weight gain, but it doesn't meet the criteria of hypothyroidism, then what's cool about that is you can now go to an alternative doctor or a functional doctor. They might try to understand a little bit more about why that is, but people get pretty frustrated with their medical doctors at times because they're not treating them. And I would just say, hey, listen, that'd be like me going to, you know, a restaurant that specializes in tacos and then asking for pancakes or something. It's just like, that's not what they do, but they do awesome things. And they prescribe drugs when it does treat the condition, and it can save your life to keep your blood pressure down, even if we can't understand why it's elevated. It can prolong it. It can do wonderful things if you have an infection and you take antibiotics. I had family members that were on prescriptions for years that really seemed to help them. So if that works for you, that's great. If it doesn't work for you, the cool thing about being in 2024 is there's more information available to us now than any other time, and we can figure that next level out. Now, the problem is that in that model, they don't really celebrate that quite so much. And frankly, they don't have time. And that gets into like insurance and why and everything else. And we'll do a whole module on like some of the trouble spots that is causing people to slip through the cracks. One of them is cost, right? And so the other model that a person can go into, if they are struggling, let's say, with acid reflux, they could find themselves in the alternative care model, okay? And so technically it's considered holistic, but I have some questions about what holistic actually means, frankly. But here's the deal. Let's say like you go to a craniosacral doctor with acid reflux. You're likely going to get some sort of craniosacral because they're going to find that the bones in your skull or possibly your sacral rhythm is off. They're going to do some craniosacral with you because that's their specialty. And if that worked, awesome. You might go to a Chinese medicine doctor and get a different form of acupuncture depending upon their training. You might get some herbs, and if that worked, that was awesome. You might go to a naturopath and get a dietary change, and if that worked, that's awesome, right? You might go to a chiropractor and get an adjustment, and if that worked for the acid reflux, then great. It kind of validates the clinician. That clinician is basically looking for opportunities to help people within their specialty field. And so although they might be a little more open-minded, they might be a little curious as to some lifestyle things. They might be able to give you some things to do at home that might be different, like an herb or a supplement or a particular exercise. I would say that, and this is what I ran into when I was in chiropractic school, is that like everybody's looking for the reason to adjust the person, but we weren't asking the question, why is that? And so I find that in the alternative model, it's dogmatic in its own way, and that they're very stuck in their own techniques. And again, that's awesome to go see a doctor who's trained in a technique and have them do that technique. And I don't want to sound like I'm being critical or self-righteous. What I'm saying is for the people that that didn't work for the people that are slipping through the cracks, for the person with acid reflux that saw all those specialty people and saw their medical doctor and the Prilosec didn't help them, or they didn't want to go on Prilosec because it caused another side effect, or they didn't want to go on depression medication because it caused another side effect. What else is there? Well, there's that systems approach, right? There's that systems approach. If we go into the biohacking approach, let's say they're like this, and this is like kind of a sad reality. It's not sad all the way, but it's also not awesome all the way. And what isn't awesome is that a lot of people I think have gone to biohacking because they don't trust doctors and they're dissatisfied with what they're getting in these two models. They're just like, screw it, I can do this better on my own. You know what? I watched this webinar. I watched this person on TikTok get into a cold plunge. I'm going to go do that. I saw this guru talking about like fast breathing. I'm going to do that. I saw a particular podcast where they're talking about getting up before the sun and working out. I'm going to do that. I saw a podcast about this person just really describing the benefits of keto. Or I saw Michaela Peterson talking about the all meat diet. I'm going to do that. Okay. Or I saw somebody talking about the Ornish diet, whatever it is. All these people online, these experts talking about one piece of a particular intervention that's possible that worked for them, or maybe worked for some of their patients, but without the context of understanding the basic cause of what's going on with you, because you're just watching the video. They don't even know who you are. So you're like, okay, I'm going to try that. And it's kind of like a conflict for me because I'm like, well, on the one hand, I believe in choice. And I want you to have options. I want you to feel like you have choices, and you have to know what your choices are in order to recover. And a lot of people that I meet, unfortunately, are resigned when they come in. Or they're stuck and they haven't accepted where they are. So either they resign and they're just like, fix me, doc. Okay. Or they come in and they haven't accepted that this is where they are. So they're constantly information seeking, looking for that thing that's going to get them there overnight, as if that's possible for their condition. And man, I tell you what, I love it when things happen in one session, and I do see that. I do see that, okay? But sometimes, and this is the next breakthrough, I still was practicing, like working like, okay, this person's inflamed. I got to stop their inflammation. Inflammation is a survival instinct. So the next breakthrough for me was like, okay, this person has acid reflux. Is this appropriate? I know it's not welcome, okay, but is the inflammation that's causing this, or the thing that's causing this, is this an appropriate response for what this body is trying to do right now? Because maybe we need to listen to it, understand what's going on, modify those things, and it will just go away on its own rather than just treat the person to get them out of it. It almost feels like a novel concept because all of these models we're just taught to help people get their symptoms to go away. But like a really big breakthrough in my consciousness was to go, well, actually, maybe this is completely appropriate that the person is inflamed. And we should maybe help them be more inflamed to resolve this if it's an infection. Or maybe we should help them like change their lifestyle so that they're no longer needing to activate those genes that say I'm inflamed, and then that goes away, rather than loading them up with like turmeric and resveratrol or sending them to a medical doctor for prednisone, right? We just go, well, why is that? Again, we're back to that question. Understand the basic cause. Okay, so in the biohacking model, here's another thing. I've seen awesome stuff. Like I've seen people do cold plunges, and that's like got their autoimmune under control. I've seen people do cold plunges, and like the cool thing about biohacking too, it's kind of a double-edged sword, is they might look at their diagnostics, like they run diagnostic on themselves. They might run something on heart rate variability. They might be checking their blood pressure. They're looking at their body composition. They're looking at like their sleep stages very carefully. And the beauty of that is the data point. And I love looking at that stuff too. But the fallout of that is like, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? And so I see a lot of people that are biohacking that are looking at things like heart rate variability, and it's not just going up, 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 and up, and they're freaking out. And it's like, dude, that's not how heart rate variability works. Like, even like if you're training and you're doing exercise and you're doing intense exercise, your heart rate variability in the short term will go down. And that's what a taper is supposed to do. A taper is supposed to help you build back up. There's this like concept in medicine called hormesis, which is you stress the body enough to help it develop resiliency, but you don't overstress it so that you lose capacities and you go into an all-on stress inflammation response. Okay. If you don't stress the body enough, it atrophies, it becomes soft. If you stress the body too much, it breaks down. And if you stress the body just right, it's like Goldilocks, it's beautiful. So exercise is one of those things that can do that. Cold plunges, like, but you got people that are doing biohacking that are like, well, if I can cold plunge for, 3 minutes to get the benefit, why don't I do 30 minutes? And it's like, no, that's not the point. Okay. If I'm taking a supplement that lowers inflammation, then I just want all my inflammation to go away. It's like, well, no, you need inflammation to repair tissue. If I'm taking an antioxidant like nitric oxide support or vitamin C or glutathione because oxidative stress accelerates aging, then I'm doing myself right. Well, no, if you take an antioxidant too much, your immune system can't keep on top of like infections that just live in your body all the time. For every 10 cells that are in our body, there's 1,000 viruses normally. Okay, so we got to keep on top of that. They might be like, well, I want to get my blood sugar under control because I read that, blood sugar and this thing called SIRT2 are some of the number one reasons that we age quickly. So I want to live longer and prosper. And so I'm going to, do keto. And I'm like, great. Keto is awesome. Unless you have a head trauma and you have a keto diet that loads you up with arachidonic acid and saturated fat and you trigger your neuroinflammation. Or keto is great if you don't have a gallbladder issue and you can't absorb fat. Or keto is great if the reason you had all this digestive issue and acid reflux is because of malabsorption. If you have malabsorption, you're not going to be able to absorb that fat. So now what happens? You go to keto and you don't absorb the fat, you go into an energy crisis, you trigger your adrenals and you exacerbate what you're trying to help. So I see these awesome people talking about awesome nuances of inflammation, nitric oxide, cognitive function, diagnostics without the basis of understanding of how these hierarchy systems work. And it's kind of like I've seen people give themselves autoimmunity by taking an immune stimulating supplement. 1 out of 6 people in the US have autoimmunity. Way more than 1 out of 6 people have autoimmune reactions that haven't progressed to full autoimmunity. They have joint pain or muscle pain, but it hasn't progressed to muscle disease or joint disease because it hasn't crossed that threshold yet. So I see like this problem where people don't trust their doctors, or they're just like, I want to do this on my own. And then they go out and they hurt themselves and they don't even realize they're hurting themselves. And then they go into a healthcare model that doesn't really understand hierarchy systems, and they're not even really looking at lifestyle other than smoking. And they're like, well, they don't even know that they're doing cold plunges, or they don't even really understand how keto could be wrecking them. And so they continue to see that therapist for like the craniosacral or the chiropractic or whatever, and they don't address the underlying mechanism that was making them worse. And so people lose hope. This didn't work for me, that didn't work for me, and they just feel completely stuck. And those are the people that I saw. And those are the folks that I really, really, really want to help. But there's other folks that I want to help too. Like, for example, I've seen loved ones die of complications of diabetes, like from kidney failure. I've seen loved ones spend the rest of their life, the last 10 years of their life in a nursing home, spending their life savings on a quality of life they never wanted. I've seen a family member who couldn't stand up straight for the last few years of their life, okay, because they had compression fractures in their spine from osteoporosis. And so there's like this story of, okay, what are you dealing with now? And then like, where do you want to go? And like the alternative model is very focused on the technique generally. And the medical model is very focused on treating disease. And so like prevention's out there. The biohacking community does talk about prevention, but like you can't just look at heart rate variability and you're not going to get there. Okay, so what's cool about the information age and like a lot of these labs is we know that, like, for example, cognitive decline, you can see that in a brain 30 years ahead of it. Look, if you have memory issues today, you're going to have memory issues later unless you work on it. That's just generally the way that works. It's not like in the movies where you hit your head and then suddenly you can think straight. You know, like when you watch the Three Stooges, that's less likely. Um, so we can look at labs and we can look at an exam and go, okay, these are the things you're dealing with now. This is what's causing your acid reflux. And then we can say, and then these are the systems that are kind of not doing so well that are causing that. And if these systems continue to progress, I know that like your brain concussion that you had that's causing your acid reflux isn't your priority right now because you're just kind of used to being depressed and not having great motivation and remembering names. But what that tells us is that you're vulnerable for cognitive decline later. I see you have a family history of dementia. So if we deal with the brain issue, we can also deal with the stomach issue. And if we deal with the stomach issue, that's why you're here. But we can also like prevent you, hopefully, from not having cognitive decline earlier in your life. Okay. So this is where we get into it. The optimum criteria of healthcare is to understand the basic cause, to develop faith, confidence, and belief. Well, there's also like this big hit piece that's been done on placebo, right? Well, what is placebo? How does placebo work? I think placebo works because you develop hope. And where does hope live? Hope lives in the prefrontal cortex. Where does allostasis live? It lives in the prefrontal cortex. So if my job is to develop faith, confidence, and belief in my clientele, and I fail to do that, then I may fail to activate the most important aspect of their care plan. It is a challenge. Everybody's different. Everybody has different expectations from me. Everybody has different expectations from the healthcare model. They have different experiences. They have different budgets. They have different capacities. They have different availabilities to implement things. They have optimism or pessimism or cynicism. They have biases towards men, working with men or working with women. And it is an incredible challenge to try to hit the Goldilocks range and all these different factors for you all. And I love it. But let's talk about the optimum criteria a little bit more. We start talking about cost. Okay, we start talking about cost. And it's like, okay, well, in order to do precise medicine, I need to spend hours with that person talking to them to figure out, first of all, how to communicate with them. Secondarily, like what lifestyle factors are contributing, what their capacities are, what our expectations are, what their prognosis is. Okay, so I can give them informed consent. Okay, but like if we just take a step out for a second and go, okay, how many people end up in nursing homes? Okay, 70% of people over the age of 65 will end up in a nursing home. The average cost of a nursing home is $9,000 to $10,000 a month, depending if you have a private room or not. $9,000 to $10,000 a month, which is, 9 times 12. What's that? Like 10 times 12, $120,000. Okay. A year, living a quality of life that nobody wants, really, right? What's the cost of assisted living? It's about $5,000 a month. Okay, so again, now we're getting into cost. What is the amount of money the average person gets back from Social Security after they retire, which is the age of 65? Roughly 66, I'm sorry. About $21,000. There are a lot of people right now headed towards a cliff. And that cliff has gotten a lot closer for people that have long COVID. And we've already been dealing with myalgic encephalomyelitis for years. And basically long COVID is that on steroids. Now you're starting to hear about things like hyper cancers or like accelerated cancers that are happening. And now they're trying to develop vaccines that treat those things. Boy, you're getting people that are getting colonoscopies in their 20s and finding that they had cancer in their 20s, what used to happen like in the 40s and 50s. So we have this acceleration of degenerative conditions. And you have people that are basically saying the reason we have these is because medicine's been successful because people are now living longer. And there's really no answer for neurodegeneration. There's no answer for degenerative conditions. And there's some truth to that is in order for us to really be successful as clinicians, we need to understand something about energy. Not like positive vibes or negative vibes or chi in this example, but more like energy like mitochondria, how we make energy. At the fundamental level, we need to understand a little bit about, we need to be cross-trained on what's happening at the level of the cell, like DNA damage, telomere shortening, breakdown of ability to make protein and not have them tangled up, okay? Oxidative stress causing energy production issues. So rather than giving people things that increase their energy, we need to investigate, well, why they have no energy, because if they don't have energy, they can't heal. And they may have poor energy in their immune system, which is why they get sick all the time, which is why they have depression and insomnia and fatigue and autoimmunity. So addressing the energy capacity. You see how far back we can go? And the reality is like, I'm going to learn stuff today after this webinar that I didn't know yesterday that I'm going to implement with you. So like the goal isn't to say that people that are doing these models and the way I'm doing it now is wrong, but like how can we do it better and how can we support each other while we do that instead of like have to be competitive as clinicians? Because as clinicians, I feel like there needs to be more collaborating and less saying the other person's an idiot or doing it wrong. Okay. These statistics freak me out. And as a chiropractic neurologist doing exams, I see a lot of people headed towards dementia and have a personal experience with that that was so disappointing and so scary. And now I have a family history of that. So like I'm very motivated not to get dementia in my own life. And so when we start talking about the glaring weakness in the optimum criteria of healthcare, what is it? It's not that it understands the basic cause. It's not that it develops faith, confidence, and belief, and that we treat people as people instead of sufferers, and that we educate them, empower them, and support them instead of drag them around and give them things. It's not that. It's not that we develop a remedy that is efficient, that is lasting, and that's economical. And I would say that $120,000 a year is not something we're not going to get close to in this clinic for a quality of life that you might really like. It's that it's reactive. It's still waiting for the shoe to drop. It's still waiting for that symptom. And what's really cool about like systems approach to medicine is that I can engage in preconception talks with men and women and help them decrease the probability they have problems during pregnancy. And then I can do an exam on a child and make sure they have all their primitive reflexes they're born with. And I can evaluate them functionally. And then I can look at them at 8 months and make sure those reflexes are integrated so that their brain is growing properly and they're hitting their motor milestones so that like now in California, 1 out of 4 boys has ADHD. Used to be like 1 out of 3,000 children, 3,600 children would have autism in the US when I started practice. Now, 20 years later, it's like 1 out of like 36, 1 out of 60, depending upon what data you look at. And it's not going to be just enough to stimulate their brains. Unfortunately, some children go through things in utero that don't allow the brain to do what it's supposed to do. So when they come out, they're not born with primitive reflexes. So they're kind of outside the functional model. And we see there's just a lot of that happening right now. But there's actually a way, wherever you're at, that's what I'm trying to say, there's another level for you. There's another level, okay? And depending upon what your level of ability to change your lifestyle, what your ability is to order tests that maybe aren't standard of care, and what your budget is for different supplements or time to talk, we can craft something to get to that next level. So it doesn't mean that if you're broke, that you can't do anything. It just means that you can't do everything, and there might be a little more trial and error. Okay, so there's one model exists that I'm aware of that actually focuses on helping you prevent disease while at the same time helping you deal with what exactly is going on. That model seeks to understand the hierarchy of systems that's gone offline, seeks to understand the reason why that is, if it's appropriate or not appropriate, seeks to support the physiology back to homeostasis by understanding the concept of allostasis, seeks to empower a person to become a patient, transforming into a student, and that adjusts and adapts to this person as their life adjusts and adapts. Understanding that, for example, there's a time and a place for hormone replacement, and that just roundly giving somebody hormones because they don't want to have symptoms might leave a lot to be desired and could be creating more problems later on, for example. And that is more focused on health, vitality, and longevity than it is on supporting reduction in symptoms. And I'm not the only one doing that, but I feel very proud of where I've come, and I've only come this far because of your support. So I just want to thank you. And with that in mind, if you made it to the end of this seminar and you're like, okay, I'm in, let's do this. And you're curious about how what I've learned, maybe since, because some of you are like, I haven't seen in a while, like I progress every week. Okay. If you're wondering maybe what I can figure out for you now versus where you were or where you'd like to go, or if you didn't know that I had a systems approach and you wanted to take a wider view and start working on that, because my goal is to work with you as much as you need for as long as you need until I can't do it anymore, or until you're not needing it anymore. And then I'll be here when you do, to develop relationships so that I can see you thrive and be excited about hearing how things are going. So what I'm offering is, if you're a client of mine and you'd like to reboot, I'll go back to my old rate for our first session, half hour. Instead of being 200, it'll be 100. So all you have to do is email contact@atlashealthmethod.com and say you'd like to take advantage of that offer, and myself or Jess will get you hooked up for that. Okay. I just want to thank you for your time today. We're going to be doing the next module in this series on May 7th at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And we're going to be getting into the art of the history. And we're going to start dissecting the optimum criteria of healthcare. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use history to really narrow our focus so that by the time we get to an exam, it's a much easier, more efficient process to getting the result that we're looking for. So I thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Take care.